The crying would not stop. Edmund Waverley, Duke of Highcliffe, stood in the doorway of his own library at 2:30 in the morning, still wearing his evening clothes, staring at the wicker basket that had been left directly on his front steps. Rain hammered against the stone balustrade behind him. The servants had all retired hours ago. He had been working through his late brother's accounts when the sound reached him through the thick oak doors, thin and desperate and impossible to ignore. He had opened the door expecting a wounded animal, perhaps a cat, perhaps something he could shoo away and forget about. Instead, he found a baby. The child could not have been more than a few weeks old. Its face was red and scrunched, tiny fists waving furiously at the cold night air. Someone had wrapped it in a wool blanket the color of heather, the kind you might find in any Scottish cottage, and had tucked the edges carefully around its small body. Beside the baby, wedged against the woven side of the basket, lay a folded piece of paper sealed with plain wax. Edmund did not pick up the child immediately. He was not a man accustomed to children. He was a man accustomed to ledgers, to tenant disputes, to the heavy burden of a dukedom he had never wanted. At 30 years old, he had spent the past decade building walls around himself so high that even his closest friends had stopped trying to climb them. He had buried one brother. He had buried his parents before that. He had learned, with brutal clarity, that loving anyone was simply a promise of future pain. And yet the crying continued. With a low curse, he bent down and lifted the basket. The movement must have startled the baby, because its cries grew louder, sharper, more insistent. Edmund carried the entire thing into the library and set it on the desk beside his abandoned account books. Then, very slowly, he reached for the letter. The handwriting was rushed but legible. A woman's hand, he thought, though he was no expert. Your Grace. Her name is Charlotte. She was born on the 15th of September. Her mother is dead. Her father cannot claim her. I am the only person who knows the truth, and I am placing her in your care because you are the only family she has left. Ask yourself what your brother did in Scotland last spring. Ask yourself what he left behind. The answers are in this child's face if you have the courage to look. Do not search for me. I have already gone where you cannot follow. Protect Charlotte with your life. There are those who would see her dead before they see her acknowledged. Trust no one. The letter was unsigned. Edmund read it 3 times. The paper trembled slightly in his hand, though whether from anger or shock he could not have said. His brother. His dead brother Henry, who had been buried 6 months ago after a riding accident on the moors. Henry, who had spent the previous spring travelling through Scotland. Henry, who had been charming and reckless and incapable of taking anything seriously. Henry, who had apparently fathered a child and told no one. He looked down at the baby. The crying had subsided into wet hiccups. A pair of dark blue eyes stared up at him from a face that was, now that he truly looked, unmistakably familiar. The shape of the chin, the set of the brow, features he had seen every day of his childhood, reflected back at him from a face barely larger than his palm. God help us both, Edmund murmured. The baby hiccuped again. He did not sleep that night. He could not have slept even if the baby had allowed it, which she did not. Charlotte, as the letter had named her, seemed to possess an uncanny ability to sense whenever he began to drift off in the armchair beside the library fire. Each time his eyes closed, a fresh wail would rise from the basket, and he would find himself pacing the room with a screaming infant in his arms, feeling more helpless than he had ever felt in his life. By dawn, the household was awake and in chaos. Mrs. Davies, the housekeeper, discovered them first. She pushed open the library door at 6 o'clock, already apologizing for the intrusion, and stopped dead at the sight of her master holding a baby against his shoulder. The baby had finally exhausted itself into silence. Edmund had not. His cravat was undone. His dark hair stood up in several directions. His eyes were shadowed and slightly wild. Your Grace, Mrs. Davies managed. What? Is that a baby? Edmund said flatly. Yes, I am aware. Whose baby? That is the question, Mrs. Davies. That is very much the question. By 7 o'clock, the entire staff had heard. By 8, a wet nurse had been summoned from the village. By 9, Edmund had dispatched a rider to London with instructions to locate a reputable investigator. By 10, he was standing in his study, staring at the miniature portrait of his brother that hung above the mantelpiece, while the baby slept in a hastily prepared nursery down the hall. Henry looked back at him with the same easy smile he had worn since boyhood. Golden hair, bright eyes, the kind of face that made women sigh and men want to buy him a drink. He had been the heir then, the golden boy, the one everyone loved. Edmund had been the spare, the serious one, the one who read books about crop rotation, while Henry danced at balls. And then Henry had died, and Edmund had become the Duke, and nothing had been the same. I should have known you would leave me one final catastrophe, Edmund told the portrait. You never could do anything simply. The painted Henry offered no response. 3 days passed. The investigator sent word that the letter's handwriting matched no known associates of the late Henry Waverley. The wet nurse, a capable woman named Mrs. Bell, reported that Charlotte was healthy and feeding well. The household settled into an uneasy rhythm, and Edmund found himself, against all expectation, standing in the nursery doorway at odd hours of the day and night, watching a child who shared his blood breathe in and out. He told himself it was duty. The child was a Waverley. The child was his niece. He had a responsibility to ensure her safety, as the letter had demanded, nothing more. He did not think about the way her tiny fingers had curled around his thumb during that first endless night. He did not think about the weight of her against his chest, warm and impossibly fragile. He did not think about the letter's warning, or the threat it implied, or the cold certainty settling in his bones that someone had wanted this child dead. He did not think about any of those things until the 4th day, when a woman arrived at his door. Her name, she told the butler, was Genevieve Bellamy. She was not what Edmund expected. When the servant announced that a young woman had come with information about the child, he had pictured someone furtive and nervous, perhaps a former servant of his brother's household, perhaps someone hoping to extract money in exchange for secrets. He had prepared himself for tears, for dramatic revelations, for the kind of theatrical performance that Henry himself would have enjoyed. Instead, the woman who walked into his study was perfectly composed. She was perhaps 24, with dark hair pulled back in a simple knot, and eyes the color of rain clouds. Her dress was plain grey wool, well made but not fashionable, the attire of a governess or a respectable widow. She wore no jewelry. She carried a small leather valise. She met his gaze directly, without flinching, and something about that directness made him pause. "Your Grace," she curtsied with practiced ease. "Thank you for seeing me. I was told you have information about my brother's child. I have a great deal of information. Whether you wish to hear it is another matter entirely." Edmund gestured to the chair across from his desk. She sat without hesitation, placing her valise on the floor beside her feet. Her posture was perfect. Her hands were gloved, he noticed. She kept them folded in her lap, perfectly still. "I assume you received a letter," she said. "With the child?" "I received a letter. I did not receive an explanation." "No, you would not have. The woman who delivered Charlotte to your doorstep took an enormous risk. She could not risk leaving more than the bare truth. And that truth is?" Genevieve Bellamy looked at him for a long moment. Something flickered in her grey eyes, something that might have been grief or might have been fear. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but there was a weight behind each word that made the room feel colder. "Your brother Henry came to Scotland last spring to visit an estate he was considering purchasing. While there, he met a woman named Margaret McAllister. She was the daughter of a local physician, well respected, entirely respectable. He courted her in secret. He married her in secret. And when he returned to England, he left her behind, promising to send for her once he had prepared his family for the news." Edmund felt the blood drain from his face. Married. Yes. Henry was married. He was. "I witnessed the ceremony myself. It took place in a small church outside Inverness. The minister is dead now, unfortunately. There was a fever last winter. But the marriage was legal and binding under Scottish law. If what you are saying is true, then Charlotte is the legitimate daughter of Henry Waverley and Margaret McAllister, which makes her your legal heir until such time as you produce a son of your own." Genevieve paused. "I imagine that complicates matters." Edmund stood up abruptly. He walked to the window and stared out at the rain-soaked gardens, his mind racing. Legitimate. The child was legitimate. Not a bye-blow to be quietly provided for and forgotten. A true Waverley, with rights and claims, and a future that would upend everything. "Margaret McAllister," he said finally. "The letter claimed she was dead." She is dead. She died in childbirth. I was with her at the end. And you are? There was the slightest hesitation, just a heartbeat, just long enough for Edmund to notice. I was her companion, Genevieve said. Her friend. I promised her I would protect her daughter. I have spent the past weeks trying to determine how best to keep that promise. When I learned that someone had discovered Charlotte's existence and meant to harm her, I made arrangements to bring her here. Who wants to harm a newborn child? Genevieve did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was quieter, as if she feared the walls themselves might be listening. Your brother married Margaret in secret, but he was not the only one keeping secrets. Margaret's family had enemies. Powerful enemies. When Henry left Scotland, those enemies learned of the marriage. They learned of the pregnancy, and they decided that neither Margaret nor her child would ever see a penny of Waverley money. What enemies? I do not know their names. I know only that they exist. Margaret's father treated a patient last year, a woman of some importance, who died under his care. The family blamed him. They demanded retribution. He refused to pay them for a death that was not his fault. They destroyed his practice. They drove him from his home, and when they discovered his daughter had married an English duke, they saw an opportunity for a far greater revenge. Edmund turned from the window. You expect me to believe that someone is targeting my family because of a medical dispute in Scotland? I expect you to believe that there are people in this world who will do terrible things for money and for pride. Charlotte represents both. She is the heir to a dukedom. She is also the granddaughter of a man certain powerful individuals have sworn to destroy. Those individuals will not stop simply because she is an infant. And how do I know that anything you have told me is true? Genevieve reached down and opened her valise. From inside, she withdrew a bundle of papers tied with a faded ribbon. She placed them on his desk with the same careful precision she seemed to bring to everything she did. The marriage certificate, letters from your brother to Margaret, a statement from the midwife who delivered Charlotte, and Margaret's deathbed testimony, written in her own hand, witnessed by the village magistrate. I have more, if you require it. I came prepared to be doubted. Edmund stared at the papers. He did not pick them up. He was not sure his hands were steady enough. Why did you not come forward sooner? Because I was afraid. She said it simply, without shame. Because the people who wanted Margaret dead are still searching for Charlotte. Because I spent weeks moving from place to place, hiding a newborn child, trying to determine who I could trust. Because coming here openly would have led them directly to your door. I had to wait until I could travel safely. I had to wait until I was certain you would protect her. And the woman who left her on my doorstep, she has returned to Scotland. She has family there, and her own reasons for staying hidden. I promised her anonymity. I will not break that promise. Edmund was silent for a long moment. Outside, the rain had intensified, hammering against the windows like a demand for entry. Inside, the fire crackled softly in the grate, and the woman across from him sat as still as a painting, her grey eyes never leaving his face. I will need to verify all of this, he said finally. Naturally. If what you say is true, if Charlotte is truly my brother's legitimate daughter, then she will be protected. She will be raised here, at Highcliffe, as my ward and heir. I will hire every investigator in England to find the people who threatened her mother. They will answer for what they have done. Genevieve inclined her head. That is all I ask. But I have conditions. Something flickered in her expression. Wariness, perhaps, or resignation. You will remain here as well, Edmund continued. You knew my brother's wife. You were present at Charlotte's birth. You can identify the people who pursued you. Until this matter is resolved, you will stay at Highcliffe as Charlotte's governess. I will pay you a generous salary, and you will have the full protection of my household. For the first time since she had entered the room, Genevieve Bellamy looked genuinely surprised. Her composure slipped, just slightly, revealing something younger and more vulnerable beneath. Your Grace, I did not come here seeking employment. No, you came here seeking protection for a child you clearly care about. The best way to ensure that protection is to remain close to her. Unless you have somewhere else to be? She opened her mouth, closed it. For a moment, Edmund thought she might refuse. Then she straightened her shoulders, and the mask of composure settled back into place. I have nowhere else to be, she said quietly. I accept your offer. Good. Edmund moved back to his desk and finally picked up the bundle of papers. I will have Mrs. Davies prepare a room for you. We will speak again in the morning. Genevieve rose. She curtsied once more, picked up her valise, and walked to the door. But at the threshold, she paused. Your Grace? Yes? Charlotte is not the only one in danger. You should be careful. If certain people learn that you have taken her in, they will not hesitate to move against you as well. I have been a duke for 6 months, Edmund said dryly. I have already learned that there is always someone moving against me. I appreciate the warning. She looked at him for a moment longer, as if weighing something she could not quite bring herself to say. Then she nodded once and left the room, her footsteps echoing softly down the corridor. Edmund stood alone in his study, holding the evidence of his brother's secret marriage, and wondered what exactly he had just invited into his home. The first week passed in careful, watchful silence. Genevieve Bellamy proved to be an exemplary governess. She was gentle with Charlotte, patient with the servants, and utterly invisible when she wished to be. She took her meals in the nursery. She spoke only when spoken to. She asked for nothing beyond what was strictly necessary, and yet Edmund found himself increasingly aware of her presence, like a faint melody playing in a distant room. He told himself it was curiosity. The woman had appeared from nowhere, carrying secrets that could reshape his entire future. Any reasonable man would want to know more about her. Any reasonable man would watch her closely, searching for inconsistencies, waiting for the mask to slip. But there were no inconsistencies. Genevieve Bellamy was exactly what she appeared to be. A quiet, competent woman who had loved her friend and was determined to honor her dying wish. She spoke of Margaret with genuine affection. She handled Charlotte with practiced ease. She answered every question Edmund put to her with the same calm directness she had shown on the day she arrived. And yet there were moments when he caught her looking at something no one else could see. Moments when her grey eyes went distant and her hands stilled and her whole body seemed to be listening for something far away. Moments when he would have sworn she was afraid, not of the threats she had described, but of something deeper, something she had not told him. It was on the 8th day that he found her in the library. She was standing before the portrait of Henry, the same portrait Edmund had spent so many hours staring at since his brother's death. Her back was to the door. Her shoulders were curved inward, as if she were carrying a weight too heavy to bear. She did not hear him approach. I know you did not mean for any of this to happen, she was murmuring, so softly he could barely hear. I know you loved her in your way, but you should have been more careful. You should have thought about what you were leaving behind. Edmund cleared his throat. Genevieve spun around. For just an instant, before she could control her expression, he saw it. Raw, unguarded grief. It transformed her face completely, stripped away the composure, and left behind something almost unbearable to witness. Then it was gone, replaced by the careful blankness he had come to expect. Your Grace, I apologize. I did not hear you enter. You were speaking to my brother. I was speaking to a portrait. There is a difference. Is there? She did not answer. She moved away from the portrait, putting distance between herself and Henry's painted smile. Was there something you needed? I came to inform you that I have hired additional guards. They will patrol the grounds at night. If anyone attempts to approach the house, we will know. That is wise. I have also received a reply from the investigator in London. He has confirmed the existence of the church where my brother was married. The minister is indeed dead, but there are parish records. He is sending copies. Then you know I told you the truth. I know you told me a version of the truth. Edmund stepped further into the room, letting the door swing shut behind him. What I do not know is what you are still hiding. Genevieve's chin lifted. I am not hiding anything. You flinched when I mentioned the guards. You have been flinching at shadows since the day you arrived. You told me you were afraid, but you did not tell me what you are afraid of. Not entirely. I told you about Margaret's enemies. I told you about the threats against Charlotte. What more would you have me say? I would have you tell me why you look at my brother's portrait as if you are mourning someone you lost yourself. The color drained from her face. For a long moment, she said nothing at all. Then she walked to the window and stood with her back to him, her reflection a pale ghost in the rain-streaked glass. Because I am, she said quietly, mourning someone. Just not the person you think. Then who? Margaret was my closest friend. We grew up together in the same village. Her father treated my mother when she was ill years ago, and refused payment because we could not afford it. I have loved Margaret like a sister since I was 10 years old. When she died, I lost the only family I had left. Edmund studied her reflection. There was something in her voice he could not quite identify, something that felt like truth, but did not feel complete. I am sorry for your loss, he said, but I still believe there is more you are not telling me. Genevieve turned. Her eyes met his, and in that moment, she looked less like a composed governess and more like a woman standing on the edge of a cliff. There are things I cannot tell you, she said, not because I do not trust you, but because knowing them would put you in greater danger than you already are. Please, for Charlotte's sake, let me keep my secrets a little longer. And if those secrets come back to harm us, then I will do whatever is necessary to protect this household. I swear it. Edmund wanted to press further. Every instinct told him to demand answers, to tear down the walls she had built and expose whatever truth she was hiding. But there was something in her face that stopped him. Something that looked too much like the grief he had carried himself for the past 6 months. The grief of losing someone you loved, and knowing there was nothing you could have done to save them. Very well, he said, for now. Relief flickered across her features, so brief he almost missed it. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. I am not a patient man, Miss Bellamy. Eventually, I will have the truth, all of it. I know. She walked past him toward the door, pausing just long enough to add, I am counting on it. Then she was gone, leaving Edmund alone with his brother's portrait, and a growing certainty that Genevieve Bellamy was far more than she appeared. The second week brought the solicitor. His name was Mr. Phineas Croft, and he arrived in a gleaming black carriage, with the Highcliffe crest emblazoned on the door. He was a thin man, with thin lips and thin hair, and his eyes moved around the entrance hall, with the quick, assessing gaze of someone who was always calculating the value of what he saw. Your Grace, he bowed with practiced deference. I came as soon as I received your message. A most extraordinary development. Indeed. Edmund led him to the study and closed the door. What have you learned? Mr. Croft settled into a chair and produced a leather portfolio from his case. I have reviewed the documents provided by Miss Bellamy. The marriage certificate appears genuine. The letters bear what I believe to be your brother's handwriting, though I would recommend having them examined by an expert. The deathbed testimony is witnessed and notarized. In short, Your Grace, if these documents are authentic, the child Charlotte is indeed your brother's legitimate daughter. And what does that mean, legally? It means a great many things. For one, it means the child is your heir presumptive. Should you marry and produce a son, that son would inherit the dukedom, but until then, Charlotte Waverley stands next in line. She is also entitled to a significant portion of your late brother's personal fortune, as well as certain properties that were part of the marriage settlement drawn up by your father. Edmund frowned. There was no marriage settlement. Henry never mentioned one. Not for Henry, no, but your father established a standard settlement for all his children. It was customary. A sum was set aside for any legitimate children your brother might produce. If Charlotte is legitimate, that sum is hers by right. I see. Edmund leaned back in his chair. And if someone wished to prevent her from claiming that inheritance? Mr. Croft's thin lips pressed together. Then they would have a strong motive to see her removed from the line of succession. Or removed entirely. Is there anyone who benefits specifically from Charlotte being declared illegitimate? Several someones, I am afraid. Your cousin, Mr. Reginald Waverley, is currently your heir presumptive. If Charlotte is legitimate, he loses his position, and any hope of inheriting the dukedom. Your late mother's family also has claims on certain properties that would revert to them if the direct Waverley line fails to produce an heir. And there are business interests, Your Grace, particularly the shipping venture your brother was involved with, that would be significantly affected by a legitimate heir. Edmund felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. My brother was involved in a shipping venture? Indeed. A rather profitable one, I understand. He invested heavily during his time in Scotland. The other partners are based in Edinburgh and Glasgow. If they learned that Henry had produced a legitimate heir, their obligations under the partnership agreement would change considerably. Who are these partners? Mr. Croft consulted his papers. The primary partner is a gentleman named Alistair Drummond. He is, I gather, a man of considerable influence in Scottish commercial circles. He also has a reputation for being rather ruthless in his business dealings. Drummond. Edmund tested the name. It meant nothing to him. Have you met him? I have not had that pleasure. I know him only by reputation. He comes from an old family, but there were financial difficulties some years ago. He rebuilt his fortune through trade and, if rumors are to be believed, less legitimate ventures. He is not a man to cross. Then I shall have to be careful not to cross him. Mr. Croft hesitated. Your Grace, if I may speak freely. Go on. Alistair Drummond is not merely a businessman. He has connections to certain individuals who operate outside the law. Smugglers, privateers, men who are willing to commit violence for the right price. If he has an interest in seeing Charlotte removed from the succession, he will not hesitate to use any means necessary. Edmund's jaw tightened. Then we shall have to ensure he does not succeed. Of course, Your Grace. I merely wish to emphasize the gravity of the situation. I understand the gravity. What I need from you is information. Find out everything you can about Alistair Drummond, his business dealings, his personal history, his connection to my brother. I want to know what he stands to gain, and what he is willing to do to achieve it. Mr. Croft nodded and made a note. I shall begin immediately. After the solicitor departed, Edmund sat alone in his study, staring at the closed door. His brother had kept secrets. His brother had made enemies. His brother had left behind a child, and a widow, and a tangled web of obligations that Edmund was only beginning to understand. And somewhere out there, Alistair Drummond was waiting. The third week brought the first attempt. It happened at night, as such things often do. Edmund was in his bedroom, unable to sleep, when he heard the sound of breaking glass. It was distant, muffled, somewhere on the ground floor. He was on his feet before he had fully registered the noise, pulling on his dressing gown and reaching for the pistol he kept in his bedside drawer. By the time he reached the corridor, the household was stirring. Footsteps echoed from the servants' quarters. A maid screamed somewhere below. Edmund took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding, his mind racing through possibilities. He found chaos in the entrance hall. The window beside the front door had been shattered. Shards of glass glittered on the marble floor like scattered diamonds. One of the footmen was kneeling beside something, his face pale. The butler was shouting orders no one was following. And in the center of it all, standing perfectly still with Charlotte clutched against her chest, was Genevieve. She was wearing a white nightgown and nothing else. Her dark hair had come loose from its braid and fell past her shoulders in a wild cascade. Her feet were bare and bleeding from cuts she must have sustained running across the broken glass. Her face was ashen, but her eyes, when they met Edmund's, were blazing with a fury he had not known she possessed. They were in the nursery, she said. Her voice was steady despite everything. They came through the window. I heard the latch. I was awake. I was reading. I heard the latch, and I knew. Where are they now? Gone. Your guards gave chase. But they left this. She nodded toward the floor beside the footman. Only then did Edmund see what the servant was kneeling beside. It was a length of rope, thick and coarse, the kind used on ships, and tied to the end of it was a weight, not a stone, something metal, something that gleamed dully in the candlelight. A hammer. They meant to kill her, Genevieve said. Her voice cracked on the last word. They brought a hammer to kill a child. Edmund crossed the hall in 3 strides. He did not think. He did not consider propriety, or decorum, or the dozen servants watching with wide eyes. He simply reached out and pulled both Genevieve and Charlotte into his arms, holding them against his chest, as if he could shield them from the world through sheer force of will. They will not touch her, he said against Genevieve's hair. Do you hear me? They will not touch either of you. I will not allow it. Genevieve did not pull away. She leaned into him, just slightly, and he felt the tremor that ran through her body. She was not as composed as she appeared. She was terrified. She had been terrified for weeks, perhaps months, and she had borne it alone. I should have told you, she whispered. I should have told you everything from the beginning. Then tell me now. Not here. Not like this. She pulled back, and the distance between them felt suddenly enormous. Her gray eyes searched his face, looking for something. Trust, perhaps. Or absolution. Or simply the promise that he would listen without judgment. Tomorrow, she said. I will tell you everything tomorrow. I swear it. Edmund nodded. He wanted to reach for her again, but the moment had passed. Servants were still watching. The footman was still kneeling beside the hammer. The window was still shattered, cold night air pouring through the broken glass. "Mrs. Davies," he called, "have the nursery windows boarded up immediately. I want guards posted at every entrance to this house. No one enters or leaves without my permission." "Yes, Your Grace." "And send for the doctor. Miss Bellamy's feet need attention." "It is nothing," Genevieve said. "It is not nothing." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then, very quietly, she said, "Thank you." She turned and carried Charlotte back up the stairs, leaving bloody footprints on the marble steps. The next morning, Genevieve kept her promise. They met in the library, the same room where she had first told him about Margaret and the secret marriage. The broken window had been boarded up, but the fire had been lit, and the room was warm despite the November chill. Genevieve sat in the chair across from his desk, her bandaged feet propped on a cushion, her hands folded in her lap. Charlotte was asleep in a basket nearby, watched over by a maid who had been instructed not to let the child out of her sight. "You asked me why I looked at your brother's portrait as if I were mourning," Genevieve began. "The truth is, I was mourning more than Margaret. I was mourning everything that could have been. I do not understand. I met Henry before Margaret did." The words hung in the air between them. Edmund felt something shift in his chest, a premonition of pain that made him want to stop her before she could continue. But he did not stop her. He sat perfectly still and listened. "It was 2 years ago," she said. "I was working as a governess for a family in Edinburgh. Respectable people. The Macphersons. Henry came to dinner one evening. He was charming, of course. Everyone found him charming. I found him charming. And for reasons I still do not fully understand, he found me interesting." "Interesting how?" "He pursued me. Quietly. Discreetly. He sent letters. He arranged meetings. He told me I was beautiful, and clever, and unlike any woman he had ever met. I was young. I was foolish. I believed him." Edmund's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. "Are you telling me that you and my brother were lovers?" "Yes, for 3 months. I thought he loved me. I thought he intended to marry me. I gave him everything I had to give, and when he returned to England, he promised he would send for me." "He did not send for you." "No, he sent for Margaret." The bitterness in her voice was carefully controlled, but Edmund could hear it beneath the surface. He could see it in the way her hands tightened in her lap, the way her jaw set, the way she refused to look at him. "Margaret was my closest friend. She was also the woman I introduced Henry to at a gathering, thinking nothing of it. She was beautiful and gentle, and far more suitable for a duke's heir than a governess could ever be. He stopped writing to me within a week of meeting her. A month later, they were married. No one told me. I found out by accident, months later, when Margaret wrote to share her joyful news. She had no idea what Henry and I had been to each other. She thought I would be happy for her." "Were you?" "I was devastated, but I was also a fool. I loved Margaret, and I loved Henry, and I told myself that if he had chosen her, it was because she was the better woman. I convinced myself that my feelings did not matter. I even agreed to be her companion when she discovered she was pregnant. I told myself I could be happy simply being near them both." Genevieve's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I was lying to myself, of course, but it was easier than facing the truth. Which is? That Henry never loved either of us, not truly. He loved the chase. He loved the romance. He loved the feeling of being wanted. But he was not capable of the kind of love that lasts, the kind of love that sacrifices, the kind of love that stays." Edmund said nothing. He was thinking of all the times he had watched his brother charm women at balls, all the times he had seen the hearts Henry left behind without a backward glance. He was thinking of the letters he had found in Henry's desk after his death, letters from women pleading for explanations he would never give. "Margaret knew?" he asked. "She knew he was flawed. She loved him anyway. She believed she could change him. I think, in the end, she realized she could not. But by then, she was carrying his child, and she had no choice but to hope. And when she died, everything changed." Genevieve finally looked up, her grey eyes meeting his. "When Margaret died, I was left with a newborn child and a secret that could destroy anyone who learned it. Not just the secret of Charlotte's legitimacy, the secret of what I had been to Henry. If anyone discovered that the woman protecting Charlotte had once been her father's lover, they would use it against us. They would say I was acting out of jealousy. They would say I had a motive to harm the child. They would tear apart everything I am trying to do. That is why you did not tell me. That is why. I was ashamed, and I was afraid. I was afraid you would look at me the way you are looking at me now. Edmund did not know how he was looking at her. He only knew that the story she had just told had rearranged something inside him, had taken his careful understanding of the world and tilted it sideways. How do I know, he said slowly, that you are not acting out of jealousy, that you truly wish to protect Charlotte, not to take something from her? Because I have spent every day since her birth keeping her alive. Because I walked across broken glass last night without a thought for my own safety. Because I love that child more than I have ever loved anything in my life, and I will die before I let anyone harm her. Genevieve's voice shook. You do not have to believe me, but it is the truth. Edmund was silent for a long time. The fire crackled. The wind rattled the boarded window. Charlotte made a soft sound in her sleep, and the maid bent to check on her. Finally, Edmund said, I believe you. Genevieve's composure cracked, just slightly, just enough for him to see the relief flood through her. You do? I believe that you loved my brother. I believe that he hurt you. I believe that you have spent months protecting a child who is not yours, at great risk to yourself, because you promised your friend you would. I believe that you are not a threat to Charlotte. You are her greatest protector. Then you do not wish me to leave? I wish you to stay. But I wish you to stop keeping secrets from me. From now on, we face this together, whatever comes. A single tear slipped down Genevieve's cheek. She brushed it away quickly, as if ashamed of the emotion. Together, she repeated. I do not know what that word means anymore. Then perhaps it is time you learned. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Edmund had experienced. The household settled into a new rhythm, one defined by vigilance and whispered conversations and doors that were never left unguarded. The investigator in London sent regular reports. The guards patrolled the grounds night and day, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, Edmund found his life rearranging itself around two people he had not known existed a month ago. Charlotte grew. It seemed to Edmund that she changed every day, her face becoming more defined, her eyes more aware. She smiled now, a gummy, toothless smile that transformed her entire face. She reached for things, her tiny fingers grasping at air, at blankets, at the edge of his cravat when he held her. He had never held a baby before Charlotte. Now he held her every evening, after dinner, when the house was quiet and the fire was low, and Genevieve sat in the chair across from him, with her sewing or her book. They talked during those evenings. Not about threats or secrets, or the danger that lurked outside the walls. They talked about ordinary things, books, music, the gardens at Highcliffe, which Genevieve had never seen in bloom. She told him about her childhood in a small village outside Edinburgh, about her mother's death from fever, about her father's kindness and his impossible dreams. He told her about Henry, about their boyhood adventures, about the guilt he still carried for not being there when his brother fell from his horse. He would have hated being Duke, Edmund said one evening, Charlotte asleep against his shoulder. He told me once that he planned to abdicate the title and run away to Italy. I thought he was joking. He was not joking. Genevieve's voice was soft. He spoke of Italy often. He said the light was different there, softer. He wanted to paint. Henry could not paint. He wanted to learn. He said there was no use being wealthy if you could not do something beautiful with your life. Edmund looked down at Charlotte. He did something beautiful, in the end. He just did not live to see it. Genevieve did not answer. When he looked up, she was staring into the fire, her expression unreadable. He had learned, over the past weeks, that she did this when she was thinking about things she could not say aloud. He had learned many things about her, that she took her tea without sugar, that she hummed Scottish folk songs when she thought no one was listening, that she was fiercely protective of Charlotte, but also fiercely protective of her own heart, and that the walls she had built around it were nearly as high as his own. Thank you, he said. She blinked, startled. For what? For telling me the truth. For trusting me. I know it was not easy. It was not, but you made it easier than I expected. How so? She considered the question for a moment. You did not judge me. When I told you about Henry, about what I was to him, you did not look at me differently. Most men would have. Most men are fools. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. Perhaps. Besides, I have no right to judge anyone for the mistakes they made in the name of love. I have made enough of my own. Genevieve tilted her head. You? The formidable Duke of Highcliffe? What mistakes could you possibly have made? Do not sound so incredulous. I was not always the paragon of virtue you see before you. I never said you were a paragon of virtue. No, but you were thinking it. The smile grew, becoming something almost genuine. I assure you, I was not. Liar. Perhaps a little. They looked at each other, and something passed between them. Something that felt like understanding. Something that felt like the beginning of a bridge being built across a chasm neither of them had known how to cross. Then Charlotte stirred and began to fuss, and the moment dissolved into the ordinary business of caring for a child. But it did not disappear entirely. It lingered in the air between them, a promise of something more, waiting to be acknowledged. The fourth week brought the visitor. Edmund was in his study reviewing estate accounts, when the butler announced that a gentleman had arrived from Scotland. A Mr. Drummond. He was waiting in the drawing room. Edmund's blood went cold. Did he say why he was here? He said only that he wished to discuss a matter of business with your grace. He was most insistent. Show him in. And send word to Miss Bellamy. Tell her to remain in the nursery with Charlotte and lock the door. The butler's expression flickered, but he only bowed and departed. Moments later, the door opened, and Alistair Drummond entered the room. He was not what Edmund had expected. He had pictured a rough man, a merchant who had clawed his way up from nothing and wore his wealth like a weapon. Instead, the man who stood before him was elegant, almost aristocratic. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes the color of winter sky. He was dressed in expensive but understated clothing. He carried a walking stick with a silver handle. He looked, in fact, exactly like the kind of man who would be welcomed in any drawing room in London. Your Grace. His voice was smooth as silk. Thank you for receiving me. I am told you wish to discuss business. Among other things. Drummond settled into a chair without waiting to be invited. I understand you have recently taken in a child, a girl, the daughter of your late brother, and a Scottish woman named Margaret McAllister. News travels quickly. Indeed it does, especially news that concerns my business interests. Edmund leaned back in his chair, keeping his expression neutral. I was not aware that my family affairs were any concern of yours. Oh, but they are. You see, your brother and I were partners in a rather lucrative venture. Shipping, imports, that sort of thing. When he died, his share of the partnership passed to his estate, which means it passed to you. I am aware of the partnership. My solicitor has been reviewing the terms. Then you know that the partnership agreement contains a rather unusual clause. If Henry produced a legitimate heir, that heir would be entitled to a controlling interest in the company upon reaching the age of majority. If he did not, the controlling interest would revert to the surviving partners, which includes you. Which includes me. Drummond smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. I have invested a great deal of time and money in this venture, Your Grace. I am not inclined to lose control of it to a child. Then you should have negotiated a better contract. I negotiated a fair contract with a man who assured me he had no intention of marrying or producing children. Your brother was very convincing. He was also, as it turns out, a liar. Edmund felt a flare of anger. My brother is dead. I would ask you to speak of him with respect. I speak of him with honesty. There is a difference. Drummond leaned forward, his eyes sharpening. Let me be direct, Your Grace. I know the child is legitimate. I know you have proof. I also know that there are those who would pay handsomely to see that proof disappear. I am here to offer you an alternative to conflict. I am listening. Relinquish the child's claim to the partnership. Sign a document acknowledging that she is Henry's natural daughter, not his legitimate heir. In exchange, I will pay you a very generous sum, and I will ensure that no further attempts are made on the child's life. Edmund went very still. Are you admitting to the attack on my household? I am admitting nothing. I am simply stating that the attacks will stop. The child will be safe. You will be wealthy. Everyone wins. Except Charlotte. She loses her birthright. She loses something she will never know she had. She is an infant. She will not remember any of this. Raise her as your ward. Give her a generous dowry. Marry her off to some respectable gentleman. She will live a perfectly happy life. Edmund stood. He walked around his desk until he was standing directly in front of Drummond, looking down at him. Let me be equally direct, Mr. Drummond. I will not relinquish my niece's claim to anything. I will not sign any document that denies her legitimacy, and I will not be bribed or threatened into betraying my own blood. Drummond's expression did not change. I was hoping you would be reasonable. I am being perfectly reasonable. I am telling you that if anyone harms that child, I will dedicate every resource I possess to destroying them. I will tear apart their business. I will expose their crimes. I will ensure that they spend the rest of their lives regretting the day they crossed a Waverley. Brave words, but words are cheap. You are welcome to test that theory. They stared at each other. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Then, slowly, Drummond rose to his feet. I will give you time to reconsider, he said. This is not a decision to be made lightly. Think of the child. Think of the woman who cares for her. Think of what you stand to lose. Are you threatening Genevieve Bellamy as well? Genevieve Bellamy. Drummond repeated the name as if tasting it. Is that what she is calling herself now? How interesting. Before Edmund could ask what he meant, Drummond picked up his walking stick and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. 1 week, Your Grace. I will return in 1 week for your answer. I do hope, for all your sakes, that it is the right one. He left. The door clicked shut behind him. Edmund stood motionless in the center of the room, his heart pounding, his mind racing. What had Drummond meant? What was she calling herself now? What did Alistair Drummond know about Genevieve Bellamy? He found her in the nursery, exactly where she was supposed to be. Charlotte was asleep in her cradle. Genevieve was sitting beside the window, a book open in her lap, but she was not reading. She was staring at the door, as if she had been waiting for him. You spoke to him, she said. It was not a question. I did. What did he want? What you would expect. He wanted me to sign away Charlotte's claim to the partnership. He offered money. He offered safety. He made thinly veiled threats. Genevieve closed her book and set it aside. And you refused. I refused. Then he will try again. He will not stop until he has what he wants. I know. Edmund crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her. He said something else. When I mentioned your name, he said something strange. Genevieve's expression flickered. What did he say? He said, is that what she is calling herself now? As if he knew you. As if you had used a different name. The color drained from her face. She looked away, toward the window, toward the gray November sky. For a long moment, she said nothing. Genevieve. Edmund leaned forward. What is he talking about? When I told you about Henry, she said quietly, I told you most of the truth, but not all of it. There is one more secret, one I have been too ashamed to share. Tell me. I am not Genevieve Bellamy. That was my mother's name. My real name is Genevieve McAllister. She turned back to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Margaret was my sister. The world tilted. Edmund felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. Your sister. My older sister. We had different mothers. My father married again after Margaret's mother died. I came along 5 years later. We were half-sisters, but we loved each other, as if we were full. We shared everything. Including Henry. The tears spilled over, tracking silently down her cheeks. Including Henry. I met him first. I loved him first. And then I introduced him to my sister. And he loved her instead. I told myself I was happy for her. I told myself it did not matter. But it did matter. It mattered more than I could bear. Why did you not tell me? Because I was ashamed. Because I knew that if you discovered the truth, you would think I had a motive to harm Charlotte, the jealous sister, the cast-aside lover. What better suspect if something happened to the child? She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But I would never harm her. She is all I have left of Margaret. She is all I have left of the family I lost. I would die before I let anyone hurt her. Edmund sat back in his chair. His mind was reeling, trying to fit this new piece of information into everything he already knew. If Genevieve was Margaret's sister, that changed nothing, and changed everything. She was still Charlotte's protector. She was still the woman he had come to trust. But she was also something more. She was family. Drummond knows, he said. He knows who you really are. He must. I do not know how. I have been so careful. If he knows, he will use it. He will try to turn you against me. He will try to make it seem as if you have been lying this entire time. I have been lying this entire time. No. You have been protecting yourself and Charlotte. There is a difference. Edmund reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cold. She flinched at his touch, but she did not pull away. I do not care what your name is. I do not care that you were Henry's lover before you were Margaret's sister. I care that you have kept Charlotte safe. I care that you are here now, telling me the truth. That is what matters. Genevieve stared at their joined hands. You should hate me. I should, but I find that I cannot. Why not? Because I know what it is to carry guilt for something that was not your fault. I know what it is to lose the people you love and be left with nothing but duty. I know what it is to be alone. He squeezed her hand gently. You are not alone anymore. Neither of us is. She looked up at him, her grey eyes searching his face. Whatever she found there seemed to break something open inside her, something she had been holding together through sheer force of will. She began to cry in earnest, not the silent tears of before, but deep, racking sobs that shook her entire body. Edmund moved without thinking, pulling her into his arms, holding her against his chest, the way he had held Charlotte on the night of the attack. It is all right, he murmured against her hair. It is all right, I have you. I am not letting go. She clung to him, as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had turned to water, and Edmund held her, and let her cry, and did not let go. The week Drummond had given him passed too quickly. Edmund spent it preparing. He sent word to the local magistrate. He hired more guards. He wrote to his solicitor in London, instructing him to begin legal proceedings to formally recognize Charlotte as Henry's legitimate heir. He spoke to every servant in the household, ensuring they knew what to do if there was another attack. And every evening, he sat with Genevieve in the nursery, watching Charlotte sleep, talking about nothing and everything. She told him more about her childhood, about the house in the Scottish countryside where she and Margaret had grown up, surrounded by heather and hills, about her father who had been a good man worn down by loss, about the day Margaret told her she was in love with an English duke's heir, and the look on her sister's face, so full of hope that Genevieve had not had the heart to tell her the truth. I hated her for a little while, Genevieve admitted. Not long. I could never hate Margaret for long. But for a few weeks, I could not bear to look at her. Every time I saw her, I saw Henry. I saw what I had lost. And then I realized I was losing my sister as well. She did not understand why I was distant. She thought she had done something wrong. She cried, once, because I would not answer her letters, and I realized I was punishing her for something that was not her fault. So you forgave her? I forgave her. I forgave Henry. I forgave myself, eventually. And when Margaret asked me to be her companion during her pregnancy, I said yes. I wanted to be there for her. I wanted to be part of her child's life. I wanted to prove to myself that I was not the bitter, jealous woman I had feared I was becoming. You are not bitter, Edmund said. You are one of the least bitter people I have ever met. I am glad you think so. There are days when I do not recognize myself. Those are the days when you are most yourself. Trust me. I have had enough of them to know. She smiled at that. A real smile. The kind that reached her eyes and made her look younger. He was seeing more of those smiles lately. He was also seeing more of her. Not just her face, but her. The way she thought. The way she felt. The way she loved. Fiercely and completely. Even when it cost her everything. He was, he realized, falling in love with her. The realization came not as a thunderbolt, but as a quiet certainty, like the first light of dawn creeping over the horizon. He had been falling in love with her for weeks, perhaps since the moment she had walked into his study and met his gaze without flinching, perhaps since the night she had carried Charlotte across broken glass with blood on her feet. He did not tell her. He did not know how. He did not know if she was ready to hear it. He only knew that the thought of losing her, of her leaving Highcliffe when the danger had passed, was unbearable. The 7th day arrived grey and cold. Edmund was in his study when the butler announced that Mr. Drummond had returned. He was not alone. 2 men accompanied him, large and silent, their faces expressionless. They waited in the entrance hall, while Drummond was shown into the study. Your Grace. Drummond's smile was as smooth as ever. I trust you have had time to consider my offer. I have. And your answer? My answer is no. It was no a week ago. It is no now. It will be no a year from now, if you are foolish enough to ask again. Drummond's smile faded. I was afraid you would say that. I assumed you would be. Which is why I have taken certain precautions. Edmund gestured to a stack of papers on his desk. I have filed a formal petition to have Charlotte recognized as my brother's legitimate heir. Copies of all the relevant documents have been sent to the Court of Chancery, the College of Arms, and the Lord Chancellor's office. If anything happens to me, to Charlotte, or to Miss Bellamy, those copies will be made public. Your role in the attacks on this household will be exposed. Your business will be destroyed, and you will hang for conspiracy to murder. Drummond's expression flickered, just for an instant, just enough for Edmund to see that he had not expected this. You are bluffing. I am a duke. I do not bluff. I strategize. And my strategy is very simple. You will leave this house. You will return to Scotland. You will never contact my family again. In exchange, I will allow you to continue your business without interference. Refuse, and I will dedicate the rest of my life to destroying you. You would risk everything for a child who is not even yours? She is my niece. She is my blood. She is my heir. That makes her mine. Drummond stared at him. The silence stretched. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. Inside, the fire crackled in the grate. Then, very slowly, Drummond smiled again. But it was not the smooth, pleasant smile of before. It was colder, hungrier. You are more like your brother than I realized. He also thought he could outmaneuver me. He also believed his title would protect him. Edmund went still. What do you mean? Your brother's riding accident. Such a tragedy, such a loss. I understand his horse was spooked by something on the moor. A snake, perhaps. Or a sudden noise. Strange, is it not? How accidents can happen so conveniently. The world seemed to stop. Edmund felt the blood drain from his face. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. Are you telling me that you killed my brother? I am telling you that people who stand in my way have a habit of meeting unfortunate ends. Your brother was one of those people. He discovered certain irregularities in our partnership. He threatened to go to the authorities. A week later, he was dead. Drummond shrugged, as if they were discussing nothing more important than the weather. I am patient, Your Grace. I am very patient. And I always get what I want in the end. Edmund did not remember moving. One moment he was standing behind his desk. The next, he had crossed the room, and his hands were around Drummond's throat, and he was slamming the man against the wall with a force that rattled the books on their shelves. You murdered my brother. Drummond's face was turning red, but his eyes were still calm, still cold. Kill me, he rasped, and my men will kill everyone in this house. The child, the woman, the servants, everyone. For one terrible moment, Edmund wanted to do it. He wanted to squeeze until the life drained out of this monster, until the world was rid of him forever. But then he thought of Charlotte. He thought of Genevieve. He thought of all the innocent people who would suffer if he gave in to his rage. He released Drummond and stepped back. Get out, he said. His voice was shaking. Get out of my house. If I ever see you again, I will not stop myself. Drummond straightened his cravat, his composure barely ruffled. You are making a mistake, Your Grace. I have made many mistakes. This is not one of them. We shall see. He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. I will give you one final chance. 3 days. If you change your mind, send word to my solicitor in Edinburgh. If you do not, he let the sentence hang, unfinished, and left. Edmund stood alone in his study, shaking with rage and grief and a fury so profound he could barely breathe. His brother had not died in an accident. His brother had been murdered. Murdered by a man who was still walking free, still making threats, still trying to destroy everything Henry had left behind. He had to tell Genevieve. He had to warn her. But when he turned toward the door, he found her already standing there, her face as white as the snow falling outside the window. I heard, she whispered. I heard everything. The confession changed everything. They sat together in the nursery that night, long after Charlotte had fallen asleep. Edmund told her what Drummond had said, about the irregularities in the partnership, about the threat Henry had made, about the accident that had killed him. I should have known, Edmund said. I should have investigated further. I should have asked more questions. You could not have known. No one could have. Genevieve reached for his hand, the same gesture he had made to her days before. But now we do know. And we can do something about it. What can we do? Drummond is too powerful. He has men everywhere. He has already killed once. Then we must be smarter than he is. We must find proof of what he did. Not just to Henry, but to others. A man like that does not stop at one murder. There will be evidence somewhere. Witnesses, records, something. Edmund looked at her. In the firelight, her face was fierce and determined, all traces of the crying, trembling woman he had held days ago, replaced by a quiet steel. You amaze me, he said. Why? Because you are not afraid. You should be. You have more reason to be afraid than anyone, and yet you are sitting here, telling me we should fight. I am afraid. I am terrified. But I have spent months being afraid, and I am tired of it. I am tired of running. I am tired of hiding. I want to fight back. I want to make Drummond pay for what he did to Margaret and Henry. I want Charlotte to grow up knowing that her family did not surrender to a monster. Edmund lifted her hand and pressed it to his lips. It was an impulsive gesture, one he had not planned, but he did not regret it. Genevieve's breath caught. Then we fight, he said, together. They spent the next 2 days gathering evidence. Edmund wrote to every contact he had in Scotland. He dispatched investigators to interview Henry's former servants, his business associates, anyone who might have seen or heard something suspicious. He sent a man to the village where Margaret had died, searching for anyone who remembered Drummond's presence there. And slowly, piece by piece, the picture began to emerge. Drummond had been defrauding the partnership for years. He had been skimming profits, falsifying records, bribing customs officials. Henry had discovered the discrepancies during his time in Scotland. He had confronted Drummond. He had threatened to expose him. And then, within days, he was dead. But it was not just Henry. There were others. A clerk, who had worked for Drummond and died in a burglary gone wrong. A customs official, who had accepted a bribe and then, when he threatened to confess, been found floating in the Clyde. A pattern of death that stretched back years, always convenient, always explained away as accident or misfortune. We have him, Edmund said on the evening of the second day, staring at the reports spread across his desk. We have enough to take to the authorities. It is not enough. Genevieve was standing by the window, her arms wrapped around herself. Drummond has bribed officials before. He will do it again. We need something that cannot be ignored, something that will force them to act. What more can we find? There was a witness, Margaret told me, before she died. There was a man who saw Drummond on the day of Henry's accident. A shepherd, she said. He was on the moor. He saw someone tampering with Henry's horse. He was too afraid to come forward, but he told Margaret's father what he had seen. Why did Margaret not tell me this? She was afraid. She was pregnant, alone, hiding from Drummond's men. She did not know who to trust. She begged her father to take the information to the authorities, but he was ill by then. He died before he could act. And the shepherd? I do not know if he is still alive. I do not know if he would be willing to testify. But if we could find him, if we could convince him to speak, it might be enough. Edmund was already reaching for a fresh sheet of paper. Do you know his name? Where he lived? His name was Dougal. Dougal MacRae. He tended sheep on the estate next to the one Henry was visiting. The estate was called Glenmore. Then I will find him. I will send men tonight. Genevieve turned from the window. Not men. You. We should go ourselves. To Scotland, in the middle of winter, with Charlotte? Drummond will expect you to send men. He will expect you to stay here, behind your walls, waiting for the next attack. He will not expect you to come to him. He will not expect you to take the fight to his own territory. She crossed the room and knelt beside his chair, her grey eyes intense. Edmund, this is our chance. The only chance we may ever have. He looked at her. The firelight danced across her face, illuminating the determination there. She was right. She was absolutely right. We leave at dawn, he said. The journey to Scotland took 4 days. They travelled in an unmarked carriage, disguised as a respectable merchant family, travelling to visit relatives. Edmund wore plain clothes, and called himself Mr. Bell. Genevieve was Mrs. Bell. Charlotte was their daughter. The guards Edmund had hired followed at a distance, watching for any sign that they were being followed. The roads were rough, the weather was cold. Charlotte fussed and cried and kept them both awake through long nights at unfamiliar inns. But they pushed on, driven by something stronger than fear. On the third day, as they crossed the border into Scotland, Genevieve reached across the carriage and took Edmund's hand. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For believing me. For coming with me. For everything." He looked at their joined hands. Hers were still cold, despite the fur muff she wore. His were larger, rougher, the hands of a man who had spent years working on an estate he had never expected to inherit. "I should be thanking you," he said. "If you had not come to Highcliffe, I would never have known about Charlotte. I would never have known the truth about my brother's death. I would have gone through the rest of my life not knowing. Perhaps that would have been easier." "Easier, not better." Genevieve smiled faintly. "No, not better." They rode in silence for a while. The Scottish countryside rolled past the windows, grey and brown and dusted with the first snow of winter. It was beautiful, in a stark and lonely way. Edmund could see why his brother had been drawn here. He could also see why it had been so easy for a man like Drummond to operate in the shadows. "Can I ask you something?" Genevieve said. "Anything. When this is over, when Drummond is stopped and Charlotte is safe, what will you do?" "I will go back to Highcliffe. I will raise Charlotte. I will try to be a good duke, a good guardian, a good man. What else would I do? And me?" The question hung in the air between them. Edmund turned to look at her. She was watching him with an expression he could not quite read, something between hope and fear. "What would you like to do?" he asked. "I do not know. I have not thought that far ahead. I have been too focused on survival to think about what comes after." "Then think about it now." She was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I would like to stay at Highcliffe. I would like to continue being Charlotte's governess. I would like—" She hesitated. "What?" "I would like to see where this goes." "This?" She gestured between them. "This. Us. Whatever it is that has been growing between us since the night you held me in the entrance hall. I do not know what to call it. I do not know if it is love or gratitude, or simply two lonely people finding comfort in each other. But I know I do not want it to end." Edmund felt something loosen in his chest, something he had been holding tight for a very long time. "I do not want it to end either," he said. "I do not know what to call it either. But I know that when I think about the future, you are in it. You and Charlotte. Both of you." Genevieve's eyes filled with tears. "Do you mean that?" "I mean it with all my heart." She leaned across the carriage and kissed him. It was not a passionate kiss. It was soft and hesitant, the kiss of two people who had been hurt before and were afraid of being hurt again. But it was also the sweetest kiss Edmund had ever known. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed, and she was smiling. "Then let us finish this," she said. "Let us stop Drummond, and then we can figure out the rest together." They found Dougal MacRae, in a small cottage, at the edge of the Glenmore estate. He was an old man, weathered and bent, with hands gnarled by decades of work. When Edmund and Genevieve appeared at his door, he tried to close it in their faces, but Genevieve spoke to him in Gaelic, the language of her childhood, and something in her words made him pause. "You are Margaret McAllister's sister," he said in English, his voice rough with age. "I remember you. You came to visit once, years ago. You were just a girl. I was, and I have come to ask for your help. I cannot help you. I have nothing to give. You have the truth. You saw what happened to the English Duke's horse. You saw who tampered with it." The old man's face went grey. "I saw nothing. I know nothing. Go away before you bring trouble to my door." "Trouble is already coming," Edmund said. "The man who killed my brother is still free. He has tried to kill my niece. He will not stop until someone stops him. You are the only witness. Without you, he will never face justice. I am an old man. I have no wish to die. And I have no wish to see more innocent people die. But they will, unless you help us." Dougal MacRae stared at him. His eyes, sunk deep in his weathered face, were sharp and clear. He was afraid, but he was also something else, something that looked like guilt. "I have carried this secret for too long," he said finally. "I told myself it was not my business. I told myself the English Duke's death was not my concern. but I have dreamed of that day every night since. The horse, the way it screamed, the way the man laughed as he rode away. Who was it? Genevieve asked. Who did you see? It was a big man, dark hair, a scar on his left cheek. He was one of Drummond's men. Everyone in these parts knows Drummond's men. Would you be willing to testify to that, in front of a magistrate? The old man was silent for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. I am old, he said. I have lived too long with fear. Perhaps it is time I did something brave before I die. They returned to Highcliffe with Dougal MacRae's sworn testimony in hand. But they did not go directly to the authorities. They had learned, through bitter experience, that Drummond had eyes and ears everywhere. If they moved too openly, he would disappear before they could bring him to justice. Instead, Edmund wrote to a judge he trusted, a man who had been a friend of his father's, and who owed the Waverley family a debt of honor. He explained the situation. He included the evidence they had gathered, and he requested that the judge come to Highcliffe personally, under the guise of a social visit, so that they could present their case without alerting Drummond's spies. The judge arrived 3 days later. His name was Lord Ashworth, and he listened to their story with a grave expression. When they had finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. This is a serious accusation, he said. Alistair Drummond is a man of considerable influence. If we move against him, we must be certain of our evidence. We are certain, Edmund said. We have testimony from a witness who saw his man tamper with my brother's horse. We have records showing years of fraud. We have a pattern of deaths that follows Drummond like a shadow. How much more do you need? Lord Ashworth looked at the papers spread before him. Enough to convince a jury. Enough to overcome the army of solicitors Drummond will hire. Enough to ensure that when we strike once, and we do not miss. Then what do you suggest? I suggest we set a trap. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Lord Ashworth sent word to Drummond, through intermediaries, that he had learned of a plot against the Duke of Highcliffe. He claimed to have evidence that Edmund was planning to have Drummond arrested on false charges. He offered to sell this information, for a price, at a meeting to be held at a neutral location. Drummond, arrogant as always, agreed to the meeting. The location was an inn on the road between Highcliffe and the nearest town. Lord Ashworth arrived first, accompanied by 2 men who appeared to be clerks, but were in fact magistrates' officers, armed with pistols. Edmund and Genevieve waited in a private room upstairs, listening through a grate in the floor that allowed them to hear everything that happened in the private dining room below. Drummond arrived precisely on time. He was alone. That was his first mistake. His second was underestimating Lord Ashworth. I understand you have information for me, Drummond said, settling into a chair, with the ease of a man who believed he controlled every room he entered. I do, but first, I have some questions about the death of Henry Waverley. Drummond's expression flickered. That was an accident. The horse threw him. Yes, so I have heard, but I have also heard that the horse was tampered with, by one of your men. That is a lie. Is it? Lord Ashworth produced a document from his case. I have a sworn statement from a shepherd named Dougal MacRae. He says he saw a man, matching the description of your associate, a man with a scar on his left cheek, tampering with Henry Waverley's horse on the day of the accident. Drummond's face went very still. A shepherd? You expect anyone to believe the word of a shepherd? I expect a jury to believe it, especially when combined with the other evidence we have gathered, the fraud, the bribes, the other deaths that follow you like a trail of breadcrumbs. I do not know what you are talking about. Then let me be more specific. Lord Ashworth began to read from the reports Edmund had gathered. Each death, each bribe, each piece of the pattern that pointed directly at Alistair Drummond. By the time he finished, Drummond's composure had cracked. This is nothing, he said, but his voice was no longer smooth. Circumstantial evidence. The word of peasants and disgruntled former employees. It will not hold up in any court. It will hold up in the Court of Chancery. It will hold up in the House of Lords. It will hold up in the Court of Public Opinion, which I suspect will be the most damning of all. The Duke of Highcliffe is prepared to make all of this public unless you agree to his terms. Drummond's eyes narrowed. What terms? You will sign a document relinquishing all claims to the partnership. You will confess to the fraud, though not to the murders. You will leave England and never return. In exchange, the Duke will not pursue criminal charges. You expect me to give up everything I have built. I expect you to choose between exile and the gallows. It is a simple choice, Mr. Drummond. The silence that followed was the longest moment of Edmund's life. He could feel Genevieve beside him, her hand gripping his, her breath held. Below them, Drummond sat motionless, his face unreadable. I will sign, he said finally. But know this, I will not forget what has happened here. One day, when you least expect it, I will return, and I will collect what I am owed. The Duke is willing to take that risk. Drummond signed the document. Lord Ashworth witnessed it. And just like that, the nightmare that had haunted Edmund for months was over. Or so he thought. They returned to Highcliffe in triumph. Charlotte was safe. The partnership was secured. Drummond was on a ship to the continent, his power broken, his empire crumbling. Edmund should have felt relieved. He should have felt victorious. Instead, he felt uneasy. He will come back, he said to Genevieve that night. You heard what he said. He will not forget. Let him come back. We will be ready. And if we are not? If he finds a way to hurt you or Charlotte? Genevieve took his face in her hands. Edmund, listen to me. We have faced the worst he could do, and we have won. We have exposed his crimes. We have taken everything from him. He is a fugitive now, hunted and alone. Even if he returns, he will have nothing. No power, no influence, no men to do his bidding. He will still have his hatred. Then let him hate. Hate is a poor weapon against love. She smiled, that rare smile that transformed her whole face. And we have love, do we not? Edmund looked at her. The firelight was soft on her features, softening the sharp edges that grief and fear had carved into her. She was beautiful. She was fierce. She was everything he had never known he needed. We do, he said. I love you, Genevieve. I think I have loved you since the moment you walked into my study and refused to flinch. I think I have loved you since the moment you held me in the entrance hall and promised no one would hurt us. She leaned forward and kissed him, softly at first, then with growing urgency. Marry me, she whispered against his lips. What? Marry me. Not because of duty, not because of Charlotte, because I want to spend the rest of my life with you, because I cannot imagine a future that does not have you in it. Edmund pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. Are you certain? You know what people will say. The governess who married the Duke. The sister who married her dead sister's brother-in-law. There will be scandal. I do not care about scandal. I have spent too long caring about what other people think. She cupped his cheek with her hand. I care about you. I care about Charlotte. I care about building a life together. A real life. The kind of life I stopped believing was possible. Then yes. 1,000 times yes. They kissed again, and this time there was no hesitation. This time there was only joy, bright and fierce and undeniable, burning away the last shadows of the past. They were married 6 months later, in the small chapel at Highcliffe, with Charlotte watching from the arms of her nurse. Genevieve wore a gown of pale blue silk. Edmund wore his finest morning coat. The servants lined the pews. Lord Ashworth attended as a guest of honor, and when the minister pronounced them man and wife, Edmund kissed his bride with a tenderness that made several of the older servants weep. Charlotte grew. She learned to walk in the gardens at Highcliffe, her small hand clutching Genevieve's fingers. She learned to talk in the library, surrounded by books and firelight. She learned to ride on a gentle pony that Edmund had chosen himself, a Christmas gift when she was 4 years old. And through it all, there was love. Not the reckless, fleeting love that Henry had practiced, but something deeper, something that grew stronger with each passing year, something that weathered the storms and celebrated the joys and never, ever wavered. Alistair Drummond did not return. Rumors reached them, over the years, of his movements through Europe. He was seen in Paris, in Vienna, in Rome. He started new ventures, but none of them prospered. He made new enemies, but none of them feared him. He faded, slowly, into irrelevance, his power broken, his name forgotten. On Charlotte's 10th birthday, Edmund received a letter from a solicitor in Venice. Alistair Drummond was dead. He had died alone, in a rented room, with nothing to his name but a handful of debts and a tarnished reputation. Edmund burned the letter and said nothing to Genevieve. Some ghosts did not need to be resurrected. The years passed. Charlotte grew into a young woman of extraordinary beauty and intelligence. With her mother's gray eyes and her father's stubborn chin, she knew the truth about her parentage. Genevieve had told her when she was old enough to understand, sitting in the nursery that had once been her refuge, explaining the complicated story of love and loss and sacrifice that had brought her into the world. Charlotte listened in silence. When Genevieve finished, she reached out and took her mother's hand. "You are my mother," she said. "You have always been my mother. Nothing you have told me changes that." Genevieve wept, and Charlotte held her, the same way Edmund had held Genevieve all those years ago, and the circle of love that had begun with a baby on a doorstep continued unbroken. Charlotte married well, a young viscount who loved her for herself and not for her inheritance. She had children of her own, 3 sons and a daughter, and she brought them to Highcliffe every summer, filling the old house with laughter and noise and the chaos of a growing family. Edmund and Genevieve grew old together. They walked in the gardens they had planted. They read in the library they had filled. They watched their grandchildren play on the same lawns where they had once walked in the dark days of danger and uncertainty. And every night, before they slept, Edmund would take Genevieve's hand and say the same words he had said to her on the night of their wedding. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me." And every night, she would smile and reply, "You are the best thing that ever happened to me too." One evening, when they were both old and grey, Edmund found Genevieve standing before his brother's portrait. She was looking at it, with an expression he could not quite read. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking about Henry. About all the mistakes he made. About all the pain he caused." She turned to look at Edmund, her grey eyes as clear as they had been on the day she first walked into his study. "And I am thinking that if he had not made those mistakes, I would never have met you. I would never have found Charlotte. I would never have found my way home. Then perhaps he did one thing right, in the end. Perhaps he did." She reached for Edmund's hand. "Life is strange, is it not? How the worst moments can lead to the best. How a baby left on a doorstep can change everything." Charlotte was not left on a doorstep. She was delivered, by fate, by love, by you. Genevieve smiled, by all of us, together. They stood in silence, looking at the portrait of the man who had brought them together in the strangest and most painful of ways. And Edmund thought about all the twists and turns his life had taken, the brother he had lost, the child he had found, the woman he had learned to love. It had not been an easy journey. It had been filled with danger and grief, and moments when hope seemed impossible. But it had ended here, in this room, with this woman, in a life that was richer and fuller than anything he had ever imagined. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not giving up. For fighting for Charlotte. For fighting for us." "I will always fight for us," Genevieve said. "Always." And she did. And he did. And the love that had begun with a crying child and a desperate letter grew into something that would endure forever, passed down through generations, a legacy of courage and hope, and the quiet, stubborn belief that love could overcome even the darkest of odds. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more unforgettable historical romances to life. And tell us in the comments, what moment between Edmund and Genevieve moved you the most? We read every single one.